welcome back to the True Life Podcast, Anatole Flamenco, History, Science or Fiction. Let's go. Equine planetary images in medieval astronomy. We shall now relate several facts of paramount importance in what concerns the dating. The first thing that attracted the attention of astronomers to the planets was their rapid movement. Their displacement is very uneven, as seen by the observer. The so-called outer planets, the ones outside the telluric orbit, are described as moving in regular loops. Examples of such loops for Saturn and Jupiter can be seen in figures 3.19 and 3.20. For Mars, in figures 3.21, planets stop, begin retrograde movement, and then appear to rush forwards yet again. This apparently gave birth to comparisons with horses galloping through the crystal firmament. It is not surprising that astronomy and astrology appealed to this vivid image. Ancient Gaulish coins bearing images of the equine planets are depicted on figures 3.22. These particular figures are the Astronomical Myths by John Blake, 1887. One of them depicts a horse with a rider, the letter S, leaping over the urn of constellation of Aquarius. This constellation is frequently depicted in the form of an urn or a person bearing an urn and pouring water from it. In the medieval book of Al-Bumasar, for instance, on the second coin, we see an equine planet carrying the constellations of Cancer on its back. The horse leaps over the constellation of Capricorn. See figures 3.22. These old coins clearly indicate the custom of at least some of the medieval astronomers to associate planets with horses. Further development of the symbolism naturally led to the use of the images of planets in the form of horses harnessed into chariots. The solar image in particular was widely used in the Middle Ages and used to be included in the planetary seven. Horses carting the sun are represented in the astrological book of Tesnieros dating from 1562. The astrological work by Leopoldi, allegedly published in 1489, and the 1515 book of Al-Bumasar. Horses driving the planet Mars in a chariot are shown in the 1562 book of Ione Tessenero, and Mars referred to by its astrological sign, and in the 1515 book of Al-Bumasar. Sometimes such books depicted actual horses as chariots, thus associating chariots with horses. The chariot of Jupiter, for instance, with a galloping centaur drawn on its gigantic wheels, can be seen in the book of Al-Bumasar. The concept would evolve. Sometimes horses would draw entire constellations. In the book of Bacharach, dating from 1562, horses draw the constellation of Auriga. A similar figure can also be seen in astrology by Radnus, figures 3.28. Astronomers ascribed such value to the leaps of the planets that they devised a special symbol of a halted chariot in order to refer to the moments the planets stop before beginning their movement, either straight forward or retrograde. The medieval book of Al-Bumasar, for instance, depicts the halted chariots of all the planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, figures 3.25 and 3.29. Sometimes, instead of horses, chariots were harnessed to fantasy animals, griffins, eagles, and the like. Similar, horses draw the planets in the medieval books of Al-Bumasar and Ione Tessenero, figures 3.23 and 3.30. It is well known that in some languages, days of the week were associated with planets in a so-called planetary week. On the other hand, days of the week were frequently depicted as horses. Whenever an equine planet would pass between the constellations or through them, the constellations were referred to as saddling said planet, thus transforming into the riders of this horse. But let us return to the book of Revelations. Jupiter is in Sagittarius. The Apocalypse says, quote, I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. This apparently describes a bright equine planet carrying the glorious rider, or the constellation with the bow. This is only one such constellation in the zodiac, Sagittarius, figures 3.16. The horse is said to be white. The Greek text renders this as dazzling white or resplendent. On a bit of a side tangent, great book by William Cooper, Behold the Pale Horse. I know there's a lot of skepticism about who William Cooper was, but it's an interesting read if you get a chance. The combination of the characteristic conqueror bent on conquest and the fact that the horse in question is the first to ride out most likely refers to Jupiter. Another dazzling white planet is Venus. However, it cannot be located here, since the text of the Apocalypse indicates the sun to be in Virgo, in which case Venus, which never goes too far away from the sun, can by no means be in Sagittarius. We are thus given a direct reference to the fact that Jupiter was in Sagittarius. 12. Mars is beneath Perseus in either Gemini or Taurus. The Apocalypse says, quote, and there went out another horse that was red. The Greek text renders this as follows. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth, and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. What we see here is the description of a red equine planet. There is only one such planet, Mars. There is also only one constellation with a sword, Perseus. Thus, Perseus is described in the book of Revelations as the rider of Mars. Consequently, Mars is located in either Gemini or Taurus, with Perseus above. This is the map from Ptolemy's Almagest. N.A. Morozov proposes that consider this an indication that the zodiacal constellation of Aries was located beneath Perseus. However, it is only in such a case that the word beneath could be understood in relation to the ecliptic, that is, the constellation of Perseus, were projected onto the ecliptic from its pole. But in such a case, Perseus shall be suspended over Mars in an unnatural position on his back. This can be observed on the same medieval map, figures 3.31. This description most probably refers to the zodiacal constellations located under the feet of Perseus. These can either be Taurus or Gemini. Perseus seems to be standing on them, but in case with Aries, he lies on his back, with his feet directed upwards. Furthermore, it is important to consider the position of the local horizon of the observer. Indeed, when the observer writes that Mars is located beneath Perseus, that is, Perseus was visible above Mars, this most likely means that their position is given in relation to the local horizon. It is natural that one should search for such an astronomical solution, in which the observer would be able to see Perseus above Mars. Considering the relation to the local horizon, for instance, some location in the Mediterranean region, this was well understood by N.A. Morozov. While pondering one of the solutions, namely the solution of 1486 AD, he did not note any aberrations concerning Mars, but on the date he indicated, October 1st, 1486, Mars was located in Gemini and not Aries. We should thus understand that Mars must be searched in either Gemini or Taurus. 13. Mercury is in Libra. Apparently, this is Mercury, the faintest of all of the primary planets. Only Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn were considered primary in antiquity. Mercury is truly the invisible planet. Furthermore, due to its proximity to the Sun, Mercury is only rarely visible due to the intensity of sunshine. Therefore, errors were frequently made in estimations of the position of Mercury in the Middle Ages. The synodal translation says, "A quart on the scale in thy hand." According to the Greek translation, the writer holds a scale in his hand. The entire verse 6 distinctly speaks about trade. Even the prices of wheat and that of barley are given. Mercury was considered the patron of trade. Thus, the position of Mercury is indicated in Libra. 14. Saturn is in Scorpio. The Apocalypse says, "I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth." The Greek text provides the rendering, deathly pale greenish. Most probably this refers to the ominous planet Saturn. The rider on it, named Death, is apparently Scorpio. In the Middle Ages, Saturn entering Scorpio was considered an omen of great afflictions. The Greek text renders another part of the passage as, "They were given power," which corresponds with this pair of death symbols even better. N.A. Morozov was not the first one to associate four of the famous horses of the Apocalypse with planets. E. Renan put this hypothesis forth long before Morozov. Renan considered that red horse equals Mars, black equals Mercury, white equals Moon, pale equals Jupiter. Renan did not provide any proof for the last two identifications, and as we can see, they actually do not correspond to the description given in the Apocalypse. However, Renan did not even attempt to date the Apocalypse on the basis of this astronomical information. 15. The sun is in Virgo with the moon underneath the feet of the latter. The Apocalypse says, "A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head." This apparently is the picture of the celestial sphere in its usual medieval imagery. The sun is named as being in Virgo. Let us point out that Virgo is the only female constellation on the ecliptic. The moon is located at the very feet of Virgo. Directly above the head of Virgo, in the direction of the zenith, we see the constellation of Coma Berenices, or the 12 stars. On any celestial chart, one can see the well-known globular cluster, the diadem, or the crown. It is referred to as 5024/M5E in contemporary numeration. The Apocalypse refers to a crown of 12 stars. It is interesting that the standard designation for globular clusters on star charts is especially a crown of precisely 12 stars in a circle. Thus, the sun is in Virgo and the moon at the feet of Virgo. 16. Venus is in Leo. The Apocalypse proceeds to tell us that, quote, "To him who overcomes, I will also give him the morning star," unquote. The morning star, as is well known, a medieval name for Venus. But in zodiacal constellations, quote, he who overcomes, unquote, is of course the constellation of Leo. This follows directly from the passage, quote, see the lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals, unquote. The text of the Apocalypse clearly indicates that, quote, he who overcomes, unquote, is Leo. 17. The astronomical dating of the Apocalypse by the horoscope it contains. The Apocalypse apparently contains the descriptions of the stars in the sky. They give us the following horoscope: Jupiter in Sagittarius, Mars in Gemini or Taurus. In a Morozov included Aries here as well. Saturn in Scorpio, Mercury in Libra, the Sun in Virgo, the Moon under the feet of Virgo, Venus in Leo. For a rough astronomical calculation, even 3 of these basic planets would suffice: Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. The Sun moves rapidly and makes a complete zodiacal revolution in a year. Therefore, it is only useful in determining the month. Mercury is usually poorly visible. Therefore, its position was frequently misestimated in the Middle Ages. The assertion of Ine Morozov. Ine Morozov asserted that the 3 basic planets of Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn were sufficient in order to date the Apocalypse to the 4th century AD, the earliest because the indicated horoscope, that is, the arrangement of planets, was only true for 395, 632, 1249, and 1486 AD. Ine Morozov thought that 395 AD was the best solution. But in the solution, Mars is located above Aries, which is why we have noted is not very fitting. Morozov was satisfied with this answer because he thought the Apocalypse could not have been written after the 4th century AD. But his result was cautiously formulated in this manner, quote, if the Apocalypse was written during the first 4 centuries of the Christian era, this happened in 395 AD, unquote. However, nowadays, after the new research in the chronology of antiquity, we understand that Morozov had no real point in limiting himself to the first 4 centuries of the new era. Once we break free from these limitations, we shall see 2 additional solutions: a 1249 solution, October 1st, 1486. The solution of 1249 is worse because Mercury, which in this case is in Virgo, was closer to Leo that year. Main assertion, A.T. Fomenko. The solution of October 1st, 1486 ideally satisfies all conditions, as indicated in the Apocalypse. Jupiter is in Sagittarius, Saturn is in Scorpio, Mars is in Gemini, close to the boundary with Aries and directly at the feet of Perseus. Mercury is in Libra, the Sun is in Virgo, the Moon is under the feet of Virgo, and Venus is in Leo. The arrangement of the planets on October 1st, 1486, shown in figures 3.32, provides clear evidence that all planets are found exactly in the constellations indicated in the Apocalypse. We have verified this astronomical result with the aid of the TurboSky software, which is modern, simple, and convenient for such approximated calculations. The result is shown in figures 3.33 to 3.39. The program came up with the year 1486 as the astronomical solution. See also figures 3.40. The visibility conditions of the planets on the night of October 1st and 2nd, 1486 was verified by the Mediterranean by using an observation point in the vicinity of the Bosporus as an example. It turns out that on October 1st, 1486, The sun set at 1730 local time, that is at 1530 GMT. The crescent of the new moon was visible after sunset until 1900 local time, after which the moon set at the local horizon. Saturn was visible until 2000 local time. Jupiter was visible until 2145 local time. Mars did not become visible immediately because it was located below the horizon. It ascended at 2105 local time and was visible the whole night. At this time, Mercury was located at almost the maximum distance from the Sun for the terrestrial observer, almost in the maximum elongation, and had a brightness of m equals plus zero point 0.7. Consequently, it was located in almost the best visibility conditions. Mercury was actually visible until 2015 local time, after which it went under the horizon. Venus ascended at 3 o'clock local time that night and was perfectly visible up until sunrise. All of this data was received from the calculations performed with the aid of the TurboSky software, which is convenient for approximate computing. We re-emphasize that the solution of October 1st, 1486 is ideal from all points of view. The arrangement of the planets for October 1st, 1486 is reflected in the apocalypse with surprising accuracy. It is evident, as one can see in figures 3.35, that the medieval observer was quite correct about Perseus riding Mars. Quote, its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. Unquote. At this time, Mars was actually located directly underneath the feet of Perseus. This can clearly be seen on figures 3.36, which shows a fragment of a medieval map from Ptolemy's Almagest with the position of Mars for the October 1st, 1486 pointed out. Mars was in Gemini, right under the feet of Perseus, and compared to the line of the local horizon in the environs of the Bosporus at 2300 local time, Mars was exactly under Perseus. Finally, the brightly luminous Milky Way passes precisely through the constellation of Perseus and Gemini in the nocturnal sky. That is where Mars was located on that date, and the Milky Way seemingly bound together the constellations of Gemini and Perseus, as well as the planet Mars. The medieval observer pointed out this remarkable event. But why did the observer mention Mars in combination with the constellation of Perseus rather than Gemini? Indeed, Perseus is not a zodiacal constellation, unlike Gemini. The reason the observer did this apparently owes to the fact that the author of the Apocalypse described the forthcoming doomsday, obviously a very dramatic event. Therefore, he selected the symbols maximally pertinent to the spirit of a great catastrophe. The first primary planet, Jupiter, ended up in Sagittarius, or the Martial constellation, depicted with bow and arrows. The second primary planet, Saturn, ended up in the Scorpio, which is believed to be a terrifying, mortally dangerous constellation. The third primary planet, Mars, ended up in Gemini, which is a peaceful constellation. But directly above it at this moment was Perseus, the martial constellation with the sword held in his hands and used for beheading the Gorgon Medusa with her serpent hair and stare that turned all living things to stone. Furthermore, Mars himself, as it is commonly known, was considered the god of war. It is therefore quite clear that the author of the Apocalypse selected Perseus with the sword due to its perfect correspondence with the eschatological scenario. One begins to understand why Mars is referred to in the Greek text of the Apocalypse as having gone beyond to the other side. Figure 3.32 demonstrates clearly that on October 1st, 1486, Mars was really in visible opposition to the other planets, which were all grouped in Scorpio, a terrestrial observer would see Jupiter, Saturn, the moon, Mercury, and the sun near one side of the celestial dome, and Mars drawn to its other side. Why did Morozov reject the solutions of 1249 and 1486 AD? Morozov's answer is simple and sincere. He frankly explained, quote, "Hardly anyone would dare to say in this respect that the apocalypse could have been written on September 14th, 1249. Volume 1, page 53. He did not even consider 1486 a possible solution. However, nowadays, more than 70 years after N.A. Morozov, and relying on new results obtained from our books on new chronology, among other things, one can confidently claim the apocalypse to have been written precisely in 1486, that is, during the epoch of the Ottoman conquest. Why is 1486 the most congruous dating for the writing of the Book of Revelations in our reconstruction? As it is commonly known, the Book of Revelations is primarily concerned with all matters related to doomsday. Quote, "The apocalypse and its vision is an image of the final hour of the world, or the eschaton, and it must serve as a manual for the revelations. But that year, when the entire medieval Christian world anticipated doomsday and terror, is well known to history. This is 1492 AD, which was year 7000 from Adam of the Byzantine era. According to the tradition of the epoch, doomsday was supposed to have happened that very year. The apocalypse is thus concerned with the advent of the judgment day, expected in 1492. The first lines of the apocalypse state explicitly, because the time is near. That should mean the proximity of the year 1492, or the year 7000 since Adam. Note that it was in 1492 that Columbus set out to sea in the age of doomsday expectations. Therefore, our independent astronomical dating of the apocalypse, or the year 1486, that is 6,994 years from Adam, corresponds ideally with the content of the book. The apocalypse was written only 6 years before the expected end of the world in the 19th century. Dating the apocalypse to the end of the 15th century also corresponds ideally with our formal mathematical result discussed in Chron 1. Namely, it implies that the apocalypse must not be considered the last book of the Bible canon chronologically, but rather one of the first books of the Old Testament. In other words, the apocalypse chronologically occurs simultaneously with the Pentateuch of Moses, or the very beginning of the Bible, and not the Gospels. In other words, the position of the apocalypse in the biblical canon is chronologically incorrect. It was written much later than the Gospels. The Gospels describe the events of the 7th century, according to our reconstruction. See more details below. 18. Our reconstruction of the initial content of the apocalypse. The apocalypse predicts Judgment Day, masking the prediction with astronomical symbolism. However, it is possible that this symbolism was obscured in the subsequent editions of the 16th through 17th century. An astronomical horoscope is encrypted in the apocalypse and provides for the possibility of dating it. The date of the horoscope is October 1st, 1486, which ideally corresponds to the expected medieval date of the Judgment Day in 1492. The apocalypse was most likely written at the end of the 19th century. The apocalypse was most likely written at the end of the 15th century AD, several years before what the entire medieval Christian world perceived as the impending judgment day in the year 7000 since Adam, or 1492. Mortal fear of this event is vividly reflected in the apocalypse. The consensual opinion that the apocalypse was written by Apostle John, the author of the fourth gospel, is apparently incorrect, because the Gospels were most likely written much earlier than the 15th century. On the contrary, the assertion of many old ecclesiastical authors that Apostle John and John, the author of the Apocalypse, are different persons. This is confirmed by our independent astronomical dating of the book of Revelations. Thus, the Gospels and the Apocalypse were written in different and distant epochs. We have recently pointed out that the epic of the Apocalypse apparently coincides with the epic of the Pentateuch. As we demonstrate in Chron 6, this is the epic of the Ottoman conquest of the 15th century AD. That is the biblical Exodus under the leadership of Moses and Aaron, Leo, Lion. The Apocalypse is correct in dubbing him He Who Overcomes. The constellation of Leo is adorned with the morning star, or Venus. The identification of He Who Overcomes mentioned in the Apocalypse, Leo, Aaron, or Moses, is also supported by the following verse, quote, "To him who overcomes I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give him a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to him who receives it." Let us recall that manna is described in the biblical book of Exodus, which, as we will show in Chron 6, tells of the Ottoman conquest of the 15th century, and we can easily recognize the white stone with the new name written upon it as the stone tablets of Moses, whereupon the new law, or Deuteronomy, was written. After having astronomically dated the Apocalypse to the end of the 15th century, it is interesting to evaluate the medieval illustrations to this biblical text from an entirely new point of view. A medieval 16th century picture of the Apocalypse can be seen in figures 3.41. We see a rider who is shooting a musket. Let me read that again for you. We see a rider who is shooting a musket. The lock of the musket is quite visible. The rider pulls the trigger, and the barrel disgorges fire. The powder horn can be seen attached to the barrel. The word death is written above the rider. We see that medieval artists reflected the realities of the epoch when the Apocalypse was written in their illustrations. It is well known that firearms, muskets, and guns were already widely used on the 15th century battlefields. For example, in the Constantinople siege of 1543, the Ottomans used heavy artillery. Another 16th century illustration from the Apocalypse shows the destruction made by an angel blowing into the pipe, from which a fountain of flames escapes. This very probably depicts a medieval gun, shooting with either cannonballs or case shot. The medieval artist depicted the flame of a large explosion where the ball landed. Apparently, in the Middle Ages, guns were sometimes referred to and depicted as pipes belching fire and smoke. This tradition of depicting guns on the illustrations of the Apocalypse survived until as recently as the 18th century. Figures 3.44 provides an illustration from the commented Apocalypse of 1799. On the whole, the subject is the same as that of the 16th century illustration. An angel, quote, blowing into a pipe, unquote, disgorging fire. We also see flames rising from the explosion of the missile at a distance. A gunshot is even better visible in the medieval illustration to the Apocalypse, which one sees on figures 3.45. Above, we can see the pipe into which the angel blows. The flame escapes the pipe, and we see a faraway explosion of a projectile hitting the ground. From the 15th century on, guns invoked terror in Europe. The appearance of such terrifying images on the illustrations to the recently written Apocalypse